Hey guys. Tonight we slip quietly through a heavy wooden door, and it closes behind you with a soft, final thump that sounds exactly like sleep arriving early. You are standing in a medieval monastery just as evening settles in. The kind of dusk where the sky can't decide if it's blue or black. And the stone walls already feel colder than they did a moment ago. The air smells faintly of wax, old wood, and something herbal you can't quite name. A single candle burns nearby. Its flame steady, patient, and far more important than it looks. This small flame isn't just light. It's time itself. And yes, gentle warning, you probably wouldn't survive this lifestyle. Not because it's brutal, but because you'd absolutely oversleep matins and feel guilty about it forever. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Midnight, early morning, sneaking this at work, I won't tell. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You move deeper into the cloister, your footsteps echoing just enough to remind you that silence here is intentional. Carefully maintained, like a rule you can trip over if you're careless. The candle flame beside you wavers as you walk, reacting to your movement as if mildly offended. Already, you're learning the first lesson of monastic timekeeping. Everything affects the flame. Your body, your breath, even your existence is mildly inconvenient to accurate scheduling. In the medieval world you've stepped into, clocks as you know them simply aren't a thing yet. There's no wristwatch, no phone glowing at you with accusations about screen time. Instead, this candle, sometimes marked with lines, sometimes not, will quietly dictate when you pray, when you eat, when you work, and when you sleep. This is a mainstream historical fact. Many monasteries, especially between the 9th and 13th centuries, relied on candle clocks or measured candles to divide the day and night. The idea was simple. If a candle of known size burns for a predictable length of time, then its gradual disappearance becomes a schedule. Time doesn't tick here, it melts. You pause near the wall, watching wax soften and slide downward in slow motion. A tiny river forms, cools, hardens, and joins a lumpy white landscape at the base. You realize that in this place, time is visible, physical, and slightly messy. Unlike modern clocks, which fail silently, candles fail dramatically. They drip, they lean, they sputter if they're in a bad mood. A monk passes you, robe brushing stone, and gives a nod that says, "Yes, you're here now. Please don't ask questions." His entire life is calibrated to light like this. Historians still argue whether monks trusted candles more than natural light or simply used whatever worked best in bad weather. But standing here, it's clear the flame has authority. Bells may ring later, but bells obey candles. You notice faint scratch marks on the wall near the candle stand. They aren't decoration, they're practical. Some monasteries marked the passage of time by carving notches that aligned with candle height. When the flame reached a certain point, it was time for prayer. This system wasn't perfect, far from it, but perfection wasn't the goal. Regularity was, obedience was, comfort absolutely was not. There's a strange calm that settles over you as you realize no one here is rushing. Not because they're relaxed, but because rushing doesn't make sense when time moves like wax. You can't hurry a candle without consequences. Try it, and you get smoke, soot, and probably a stern lecture about humility. One quirky tidbit monks quietly knew was that cheaper tallow candles burned faster and smellier than beeswax ones. That meant poorer monasteries literally experienced shorter hours. At least in candle terms. Same prayers, less wax, equality, but make it smoky. You follow the corridor into the cloister garth, an open square under the darkening sky. Candles glow behind windows like tiny stars trapped indoors. This is the rhythm of monastic life beginning to assert itself. Evening prayer approaches not because someone checked the time, but because enough candle has disappeared to justify it. Imagine structuring your entire sense of reality around something that could be ruined by a draft. Cozy, but also slightly unhinged. As you stand there, listening to distant murmurs and the soft hiss of flame, you realize this place is not built for precision, but for repetition. The candle doesn't promise exact minutes. It promises consistency, and consistency, in a medieval monastery, is almost the same thing as holiness. There's a faint humor in it, too. Somewhere in history, a monk definitely stared at a candle and thought, I swear this thing burned faster yesterday. Historians still argue whether variations in wax composition, wick thickness, or ambient temperature made candle clocks unreliable. But the monks adapted. They always did. If time was a little off, God would understand. Probably. You exhale slowly, matching your breath to the quiet space. The candle flame steadies again, forgiving you. This is where your journey begins, not with a bang, but with a flicker. Time, here, is already slipping away, and no one is chasing it. You don't need to either. You stay close to the candle as you walk, because here it isn't just lighting your way, it's quietly explaining how the entire system works. The monks around you don't talk about time the way you do. There's no 5 more minutes, or running late. Instead, there's a shared understanding that when the candle reaches a certain point, the next thing simply happens. Prayer begins, work ends, sleep arrives whether you feel ready or not. This reliance on candles comes from a practical problem medieval monasteries couldn't escape. Sundials were lovely, but only worked when the sun cooperated. Which, as you know, it rarely does. Water clocks existed too, dripping steadily through the night. But they froze in winter and clogged with sediment. Candles, though, were portable, relatively predictable, and already part of monastic life. Light was needed anyway, so why not let it double as time itself? That's the mainstream historical logic behind candle timing. And standing here, it feels oddly reasonable. You notice that some candles have faint rings carved around them, evenly spaced like tree rings. These marks are intentional. A standard candle of known size, made from the same material, could burn for a fairly consistent duration. When the flame passed one ring, an hour, or something close to it, had passed. Not your modern hour, of course. Medieval hours stretched and shrank depending on season and latitude, which is a polite way of saying time was doing its own thing back then. One quirky tidbit monks quietly dealt with was wick anxiety. A poorly trimmed wick could burn too fast, drip excessively, or, worst of all, go out entirely. Imagine missing a prayer because your time source had a personal crisis. Novices were often tasked with maintaining candles, which meant learning the delicate art of wick trimming. Too short and the flame sulked. Too long and it smoked like it was protesting monastery policy. This was not glamorous work, but it was essential. You don't argue with timekeepers. You pause near a side chamber where a monk carefully replaces a candle, bowing his head slightly as he does so. This isn't superstition, it's respect. The candle is performing a function assigned by centuries of tradition. Historians still argue whether monks genuinely believed candles measured divine time or simply accepted them as the best available tool. But the ritual around them suggests something deeper than convenience. Time here is sacred because it structures prayer, and prayer structures everything else. As you follow the corridor, you begin to understand that candle time isn't about precision, it's about rhythm. The slow shortening of wax mirrors the slow shaping of monastic life. Nothing here is meant to be rushed. Even mistakes unfold gradually. If a candle burns faster than expected, the day shifts slightly, like a song played a bit too quickly. Everyone adjusts. No one panics. Well, maybe one monk does, but he keeps it internal, which is very on brand. You notice small metal holders beneath some candles, designed to catch dripping wax. This isn't just for cleanliness. Collected wax could be reused, melted down, and remade into new candles. Time, in a way, was recycled. There's something comforting about that. Your wasted minutes feel much more dramatic by comparison. Here, even lost wax gets a second chance. The soundscape reinforces the system. No ticking, no chiming, just the soft hiss of flame, occasional footsteps, and distant chanting. When bells ring later, they'll signal transitions, but those bells depend on candle timing. Someone has to decide when to ring them. And that decision is often made by watching wax surrender to gravity. You realize how much trust is placed in something so fragile. One careless breeze could shift the entire schedule. Historians still argue whether different monasteries standardized candle sizes or relied on local tradition. And the answer seems to be both. Inconsistently, some orders attempted uniformity, specifying candle dimensions in their rules. Others shrugged and adapted. This lack of strict standardization didn't bother them as much as it would bother you. Time wasn't a commodity yet. It was an experience. There's gentle humor in imagining a monk staring at a candle, thinking, surely it's been an hour, while another insists it hasn't. Somewhere, A quiet disagreement definitely happened. No shouting, just passive-aggressive silence and maybe an extra psalm for good measure. 3 light jokes per section. Remember, there's one. As you continue walking, the realization settles in. Candle time demands presence. You can't ignore it, you have to watch it, care for it, and respond to it. Unlike modern clocks, which scold you from across the room, candles require proximity. They pull you into the moment whether you like it or not. You feel yourself slowing down, matching your internal pace to the flame's unhurried burn. By now, you understand why candles mattered so much. They weren't perfect, but they were intimate. They tied time to light, effort, and attention. And as you move deeper into monastic life, you'll see how this simple system shaped everything from prayer schedules to sleep patterns. The candle doesn't rush you. It simply keeps going, quietly reminding you that time, like wax, only moves one way. You don't notice the rule of Benedict at first. It isn't posted on the wall like a warning sign. And no one hands you a pamphlet. Instead, you feel it in the way the monastery moves, slowly, deliberately, as if everyone is following an internal metronome made of wax and prayer. This rule, written in the 6th century by Benedict of Nursia, becomes the backbone of Western monastic life, shaping how monks divide their day. It's a mainstream historical fact that the rules structured time around fixed prayer hours, known as the divine office, and candles quietly help make those hours real. You walk alongside the monks as they transition from one task to another, and you begin to sense the rhythm: prayer, work, reading, silence, repeat. The candle doesn't just tell time, it enforces obedience. When enough wax has vanished, it doesn't matter if you're mid-thought or mid-sigh. You move. The rule doesn't negotiate, it suggests balance, humility, and moderation. But it also expects you to show up on time, even if on time is defined by a flame. The rule of Benedict outlines 8 prayer hours throughout the day and night: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. You don't need to memorize them. The monks already have, along with the candle lengths associated with each. Historians still argue whether Benedict intended these hours to be strictly timed or flexibly observed. But in practice, monasteries leaned heavily on visual cues. Candles became the physical reminder that prayer wasn't optional or spontaneous. It was scheduled by melting wax. You pause near a small chapel where a candle burns beside a manuscript stand. This particular candle is thicker, slower burning, clearly important. It marks the passage toward the next prayer. A monk nearby glances at it, not anxiously, but attentively, like someone watching soup simmer. There's no rush. The rule values steadiness over speed, and candle time suits that perfectly. One quirky tidbit buried in monastic records suggests that some monks could roughly estimate time by candle smell alone. Beeswax has a distinct, clean scent, while tallow, made from animal fat, smells heavier, sometimes unpleasant. A change in smell could signal how far along the candle had burned. Imagine knowing it's time to pray because the air smells slightly more like regret. Not exactly in the rule, but undeniably practical. The rule also emphasizes silence, which makes candle timing even more effective. No one is shouting reminders or calling out hours. The flame does its quiet work, and everyone is expected to notice. If you miss a prayer, it's not because someone forgot to tell you. It's because you weren't paying attention. The candle becomes a kind of moral mirror, reflecting your focus or lack thereof. You realize that candle time fits the rule's philosophy beautifully. Mechanical precision would have felt too rigid, too obsessed with exactness. Benedict wanted a life balanced between extremes. Candles, with their gentle variability, allow for human imperfection without chaos. If a prayer starts a few minutes early or late, it's still prayer. God, presumably, isn't running a stopwatch. Historians still argue whether candle-based timing influenced the length of prayers themselves. Some believe monks adapted the pace of chanting to fit available time, stretching or compressing psalms depending on the flame. Others think the prayers were fixed and candles simply adjusted around them. Standing here, you suspect it was a bit of both. Flexibility disguised as discipline. There's a quiet humor in imagining Benedict himself approving of this system. A man who valued moderation would likely appreciate a timekeeping method that literally burns away excess. No hoarding time here. You use it, or it melts into a puddle at your feet. One light joke. Modern productivity gurus would absolutely lose their minds over this setup. As you move through the cloister, the candle's glow follows you, steady and unassuming. The rule of Benedict doesn't shout instructions, it whispers them through routine. Candles translate those whispers into visible change. Wax shortens, shadows shift, a bell rings, life moves on. By now, you feel the rule not as a list of regulations, but as a flow you're carried by. Candle by candle, prayer by prayer. The day is carved into manageable pieces. You don't need to think about what comes next. The flame already knows, and in this quiet certainty, you begin to understand why this way of life endured for centuries. Even as the world outside rushed forward without waiting, you drift next toward the place where time itself is made, which feels oddly appropriate. Behind a low door, away from the chapel and its quiet authority, you find the candle workshop. It's warmer here, and the air is heavier, carrying the unmistakable scent of wax in various stages of becoming something useful. This is where monks and novices turn raw materials into the very thing that governs their days. You don't rush in, no one rushes anywhere, you stand and observe, because that's how things are done. The mainstream historical fact settles in quickly. Monasteries often produced their own candles. Buying them in bulk wasn't always practical or affordable, and consistency mattered. If candles were going to define prayer hours, they needed to burn in predictable ways. So monks learned candle making as carefully as they learned Latin psalms. Wax wasn't just a craft material, it was infrastructure. You watch as a novice tends a pot of melted wax, stirring slowly, patiently. Beeswax, when available, is prized. It burns cleaner, steadier, and smells faintly sweet. Tallow candles, made from rendered animal fat, are cheaper and more common, but they smoke more and burn unevenly. This difference matters. A beeswax candle might give you a slightly longer hour than a tallow one. And yes, monks noticed. Time, once again, favors those with better resources. Some things truly never change. One quirky tidbit floats into your awareness as you watch wax being poured into molds. Candle molds were sometimes standardized within a monastery to ensure consistent burn times. Not across regions, not across orders, just locally. This means one monastery's hour could literally be longer than another's. Imagine visiting another monastery and realizing their prayers feel suspiciously rushed. Awkward, but quietly endured. You notice how careful everyone is with measurements. The wick is scented precisely, too close to the edge, and the candle burns unevenly. Too thick, and it burns too fast. Wick making is its own small art, often done by twisting plant fibers or linen threads. A poorly made wick could sabotage an entire schedule. No pressure, of course. Just the structure of daily life depending on your knot-tying skills. Historians still argue whether monasteries kept written records of candle burn rates or relied purely on tradition and experience. There's evidence of both. Some houses documented how long a candle of a certain size should last. Others trusted elder monks who just knew. Watching them work, you suspect experience mattered more than math. This is a place where knowledge is absorbed, not calculated. The rhythm of candle making mirrors prayer itself. Repetitive, quiet, oddly calming. Dip, lift, cool, dip again. Each layer adds thickness, slowly building something that will eventually disappear. There's a gentle irony there that no one comments on. Candles are made with care so they can be consumed with purpose. You wonder briefly if monks ever felt philosophical about that. Then you realize of course they did. They just didn't write blog posts about it. One light joke slips in as you imagine a novice thinking, if I mess this up, everyone wakes up early tomorrow. Medieval anxiety, but make it wax-based. You step closer and see small imperfections in finished candles, tiny bubbles. Slight bends. These aren't discarded. Perfection isn't required. What matters is function. A candle that burns roughly evenly is good enough to keep the rule moving. Absolute precision belongs to a future filled with gears and springs. This world prefers forgiveness. As the candles cool, they're set aside in bundles, ready to be used throughout the monastery. Some are reserved for night prayers, thicker and longer burning. Others are meant for shorter intervals. You realize how carefully life here is tiered. Different flames for different moments, each with its own responsibility. Historians still argue whether monks viewed candle making as a spiritual act or merely necessary labor. Watching the quiet focus, the unhurried pace, you suspect the distinction didn't matter. Work itself was prayer. Wax melting, cooling, and hardening becomes part of the same rhythm as chanting psalms. Time is shaped before it is measured. As you leave the workshop, the warmth fades, and you return to cooler stone corridors. Somewhere ahead, one of these newly made candles will be lit, and its slow disappearance will signal another transition. You feel oddly comforted knowing exactly where it came from. Time here isn't abstract, it's handmade. You don't wake up so much as you surface. Sleep loosens its grip reluctantly, like it doesn't quite agree with the schedule but goes along with it anyway. The darkness is deep, the kind that presses gently against your eyelids even after they open. Somewhere nearby, a candle flame moves, or maybe it's just the idea of it that pulls you awake. This is Matins, the night office, and it arrives long before dawn has any intention of showing up. You sit up, joints stiff, mind foggy, and immediately understand why this prayer is considered a test of devotion. The mainstream historical fact is simple. Medieval monks regularly rose in the middle of the night for matins. Often around what we'd call midnight or later, depending on season. But here, the candle decides. A thick night candle has burned down to its appointed mark, and that quiet visual cue ripples through the dormitory faster than any alarm clock ever could. You shuffle into your robe, trying not to make noise, though you quickly realize noise isn't the biggest concern. Falling back asleep standing up is. The candle flame seems almost smug as it leads you out of the sleeping area. Its light low and steady, revealing stone floors that feel colder than they did yesterday. Or maybe you're just more tired. Time does that to you here. It blurs distinctions. As you walk toward the chapel, you notice how different candlelight feels at night. It's softer, more contained, as if it knows this hour belongs to whispers and half-thoughts. Shadows stretch longer, corners deepen, and every movement feels slightly unreal. Historians still argue whether matins was meant to be physically taxing as a form of discipline or spiritually clarifying through quiet exhaustion. Right now, it feels like both, with a strong bias toward, why am I awake? Inside the chapel, candles line the walls, each one carefully chosen for this hour. These are long-burning candles, designed to last through extended readings and chants. The monks take their places without speaking, guided by habit and faint light. No one checks the time. No one needs to. The flame already did that for them. One quirky tidbit tucked into monastic anecdotes suggests that some monks judged how close matins was by the temperature of the candle holder. Warmer metal meant the candle had been burning longer. It's not scientific, but when you're half asleep in the 11th century, you work with what you've got. Modern smart homes could never. You settle into the rhythm of chanting, the sound low and steady, rising and falling like controlled breathing. Candlelight flickers across faces that look both ancient and timeless. The prayers are long, deliberately so, meant to stretch the night into something meaningful. Time here isn't something to get through, it's something to inhabit. Even when you'd really prefer a pillow. Historians still argue whether the length of matins changed based on candle availability. In lean times, with fewer resources, the office may have been shorter simply because wax was precious. In wealthier monasteries, matins could stretch luxuriously, supported by ample beeswax candles that burned clean and slow. Spiritual depth, it turns out, sometimes smells faintly like honey. As the prayer continues, you notice how your sense of time dissolves. Minutes don't stack neatly, instead, you move from chant to chant, candle mark to candle mark, until the concept of how long stops mattering. This is one of those subtle effects candle timing has on the mind. Without numbers, you experience duration emotionally rather than intellectually. Tiredness becomes a measure, calm becomes another. One light joke drifts through your mind, somewhere. A monk definitely thought, if I stare at the flame long enough, maybe it'll hurry. It doesn't. Candles are immune to peer pressure. Eventually, the candle reaches its final mark, and the office ends not with urgency, but with a gentle sense of completion. No dramatic conclusion. Just a collective understanding that this portion of the night has been properly used. You rise, stretch quietly, and follow the others back toward rest. Dawn is still a distant concept, but something has shifted. The night feels lighter now, as if the candle burned away more than wax. As you lie back down, the idea settles in that matins isn't about efficiency or even endurance. It's about alignment, matching your body to a rhythm older than comfort. The candle has done its job. Time has passed, prayer has happened, sleep returns, slower this time, but deeper, as if it approves of the effort. You wake again, this time with less drama. The darkness has softened into a grey suggestion of morning, the kind that hints at light without committing to it. Somewhere nearby, a candle has been burning while you slept, quietly doing its job without waking you every 5 minutes to ask if you're sure you're still tired. This is prime, followed later by terse, and they arrive not as interruptions, but as gentle nudges shaped by flame length and routine. You rise with the others, movements smoother now, as if your body has started to learn the language of candle time. Prime traditionally marks the first hour of daylight, though hour is doing a lot of flexible work here. The mainstream historical fact is that prime, terse, sext, and nun divide the daylight hours into prayer intervals, anchoring work and study between them. Candles help bridge the uncertainty between night and day, especially when clouds or winter darkness make sunlight unreliable. As you gather in the chapel, you notice how the candle used now is slimmer, designed for shorter intervals. It burns faster, its flame sharper, more alert. There's something appropriate about that. Morning prayers are brisker, less meditative than matins, more practical. The day has things to do. Fields need tending, manuscripts need copying, soup needs not burning. The candle reflects that urgency without ever rushing. One quirky tidbit you pick up is that some monasteries placed candles near windows during daylight offices, using natural light as a secondary reference. If the candle burned too fast compared to the sky outside, adjustments were made. This wasn't cheating, it was calibration. Historians still argue whether monks trusted candles more indoors and sunlight outdoors, or whether the two were always blended. Either way, time here is negotiated, not dictated. You move from prayer to work, hands busy, mind quieter. Terse arrives mid-morning, announced not by a bell alone, but by a candle reaching its appointed stubby end. You're surprised how quickly it happens. Morning hours feel shorter, more compressed. This is a known phenomenon even today, but here it's amplified by wax. A faster burning candle means you feel like time is sprinting, even though nothing else has changed. There's a faint impatience in the air, not annoyance, just awareness. Tasks pause, tools are set down, the flame has spoken. You follow the group back to prayer, noticing how no one resents the interruption. The candle doesn't feel like an enemy of productivity, it feels like a reminder that productivity isn't the point. Historians still argue whether the pace of work was adjusted to fit candle time or whether candles were adjusted to fit work. Watching the monks, you suspect the answer is a quiet compromise. If a task takes longer one day, the next prayer waits a moment. If the candle burns faster, work shortens. Flexibility exists, but always within boundaries. Sext arrives near midday, and by now, you feel the subtle fatigue that comes from constant attentiveness. Candle time demands awareness. You can't zone out entirely. Someone is always watching the flame, and that someone might be you. There's a shared responsibility here that modern clocks don't require. You don't outsource timekeeping to a device. You participate in it. One light joke flickers through your thoughts. Modern multitasking would absolutely fail here. Try answering emails while watching a candle, chanting psalms, and pretending not to be hungry. The candle would judge you silently. By none. The late afternoon office. The light outside is shifting again. Shadows lengthen, and the candle seems to slow, as if even it is tired. You feel a strange satisfaction in knowing exactly where you are in the day without ever checking a number. Your body knows. The flame confirms. As you move toward evening once more, patience becomes the dominant virtue. You wait for candles to finish what they started. You wait for prayers to conclude naturally. You wait because that's how this system works. And in that waiting, something inside you unwinds. Time isn't chasing you, it's walking beside you, carrying a small flame, and trusting you to keep up. You settle into a wooden bench beside a narrow desk, the surface worn smooth by centuries of elbows and quiet concentration. A candle stands just to your left, close enough to illuminate the page without setting it on fire, which, you quickly realize, is a balance learned the hard way. This is the hour for reading and copying, and the candle becomes both your ally and your limiter. When it burns too low, words retreat into shadow. When it burns too high, wax drips threaten parchment like slow, inevitable avalanches. The mainstream historical fact here is that medieval monasteries were major centers of literacy and manuscript production. Monks spent long hours copying texts by hand, often in dim conditions. Candlelight made this possible after sunset, but it also defined how long the work could reasonably continue. Your eyes strain gently, adjusting to flicker and contrast. And you understand immediately why this labor demanded patience more than speed. You dip a quill, steady your hand, and follow the lines of a text you've copied dozens of times before. The candle's flame dances slightly, reacting to your movement, and the letters seem to breathe. Shadows stretch and shrink across the page, turning straight lines into wavering ones. You learn to write with the flame, not against it. If the light shifts, you pause. Fighting the candle never ends well. One quirky tidbit preserved in monastic lore suggests that some monks preferred older, partially burned candles for reading because their flames were steadier. Fresh candles, oddly enough, could flicker more as the wick settled. Imagine intentionally waiting for your candle to calm down before starting work. Timekeeping and task selection quietly merge. The silence in the scriptorium is deep, but not empty. You hear the faint scratch of quills, the occasional cough, and the soft hiss of wax surrendering to heat. No one speaks. Words are precious here, saved for prayer and page. The candle becomes your conversational partner, its slow progress reminding you not to rush. Historians still argue whether candlelight significantly increased copying errors due to eye strain. But monks developed strategies, frequent pauses, short sessions, and yes, better candles when possible. You notice small metal shields behind some candles, designed to reflect light forward and protect walls from soot. This isn't decoration, it's efficiency. More light, less mess. Even here, monks tweak their environment to make candle time work better. The flame remains central, but it's supported, guided, and respected. As time passes, measured only by wax height, you feel a gentle fatigue settle in. Not exhaustion, just a soft blur at the edges of focus. The candle is nearing its end, and your concentration mirrors it. This is intentional. Reading sessions are meant to end before minds grow sloppy. The candle doesn't just tell you when to stop, it tells you why stopping is wise. One light joke drifts through your thoughts. Autocorrect would have saved centuries of effort, but also robbed monks of their best excuse for mistakes. Sorry, the candle flickered. You lift your eyes and notice others doing the same. There's a shared awareness that this period is closing. No announcement is needed. The flame shortens, shadows deepen, and the page slowly disappears into grey. When the candle finally gutters out, or is gently snuffed before that happens, work ends without resentment. The boundary feels natural. Historians still argue whether monks preferred daylight reading to candlelit study or valued the quiet focus of night hours more. Sitting here, you suspect night had its appeal. Candlelight narrows the world. It reduces distraction. It turns reading into an intimate act between you, the text, and a flame that's steadily giving up its existence to make the moment possible. You stand, stretching carefully, aware of how long you've been still. The candle stub remains, warm and uneven, a physical record of attention spent. Time, once again, has left evidence behind, and as you move on, eyes tired but mind calm, you realize that reading by candlelight isn't just about preserving knowledge. It's about learning how to stop before the light tells you to. You become aware of the draft before you see it. A subtle coolness brushes your cheek, and the candle flame beside you responds instantly, leaning away as if offended by the intrusion. This is where certainty wobbles. Up to now, candle time has felt dependable, almost comforting. But here, in the quiet in-between moments, you begin to notice how fragile that dependability really is. The mainstream historical fact quietly steps forward. Candle clocks were never perfectly accurate. Air currents, temperature, wax composition, wick thickness, all of it affected burn speed. Medieval monks knew this, even if they didn't phrase it in scientific terms. They lived with the consequences daily. A drafty corridor could shorten an hour. A warmer room could stretch one. Time, in this system, is cooperative, not absolute. You follow a senior monk as he carefully adjusts a candle stand, moving it a few inches away from a doorway. This isn't fussiness, it's calibration. He watches the flame settle, straightening again, and gives a barely perceptible nod. Somewhere, far in the future, an engineer will do the same thing with a machine. But here it's done with intuition and experience. Historians still argue whether monasteries attempted to correct for environmental variation or simply accepted it as part of divine order. Some evidence suggests monks shielded candles from drafts using glass lanterns or wooden housings. Other sources imply they didn't bother. trusting that slight variations didn't matter. Standing here, watching that flame steady itself, you sense a quiet middle ground. They cared, but not obsessively. Precision served prayer, not the other way around. You sit again, eyes drawn to the way the flame shortens unevenly now, one side melting faster than the other. Wax strips form asymmetrical patterns. Like time itself has a preference. You imagine how this must have sparked small debates within the monastery. Did the candle really reach the mark? Or did the draft cheat everyone out of a few minutes? No raised voices, just thoughtful glances and perhaps an extra psalm to smooth things over. One quirky tidbit surfaces from the margins of monastic history. Some monasteries reportedly tested candles in advance, burning sample ones to estimate their speed before assigning them to prayer hours. This is medieval quality control, and it's strangely reassuring. You picture a monk solemnly watching a candle burn, taking mental notes, and deciding whether it's worthy of marking time. No spreadsheets, just vibes and experience. The longer you watch, the more you notice how much attention candle timing requires. Someone always has to be aware. Someone has to decide when variation matters and when it doesn't. This responsibility rotates, shared among monks, reinforcing community. Timekeeping isn't delegated to an object alone. It's a relationship between people and flame. One light joke slips in as you imagine a monk blaming the wind for being late. The draft was particularly ambitious today. It probably worked once. Historians still argue whether candle timing was supplemented by internal bodily cues, hunger, fatigue, intuition, or whether monks tried to suppress those in favor of external signals. From where you sit, it's clearly both. The flame provides structure, but the body provides confirmation. When the candle says it's time and your stomach agrees, the system feels complete. You begin to appreciate that candle time teaches tolerance for uncertainty. Unlike a clock that insists on correctness, a candle invites interpretation. It asks you to pay attention, to weigh context, to accept small imperfections. This mindset seeps into everything else. Work is done carefully, not quickly. Prayer is attentive, not rushed. Even disagreement feels softened by shared acknowledgement that time itself is a little fuzzy. As the candle nears its end, the flame grows restless, flickering more dramatically, as if aware of its approaching conclusion. This final phase is the least reliable, and everyone knows it. Decisions made at this point carry a margin of error that's quietly accepted. If prayer begins a few minutes early or late, no one panics. The point was never accuracy alone. It was alignment. You stand and move on, passing through another corridor where candles burn behind small wooden screens. Protected from drafts, each monastery adapts differently. Some trust enclosure, others trust patience. Historians still argue whether these differences mattered in the long run. But the system endured for centuries, which suggests it worked well enough. As you walk, you feel oddly comforted by the idea that time here is not tyrannical. It bends, it negotiates, it forgives. The candle flame, now out of sight, continues somewhere behind you, still burning, still shaping the day, and you carry with you the quiet understanding that even imperfect time can be deeply meaningful when everyone agrees to follow it together. You enter the refectory just as the light settles into a soft, honeyed glow, the kind that makes even plain stone walls look forgiving. Long wooden tables stretch ahead of you, polished smooth by generations of quiet meals. A candle stands at the center of each table, modest but authoritative, its flame steady enough to suggest that this, too, is a timed event. Eating here is never rushed, but it is never endless. The candle will decide when chewing gives way to contemplation. The mainstream historical fact is simple and surprisingly soothing. Medieval monks ate their meals in silence, often while listening to a reading from scripture or a devotional text. The timing of these meals was structured by the same candle-based system governing prayer and work. You sit, hands folded briefly, and feel how deeply routine is embedded here. Hunger isn't an emergency, it's just another signal that fits neatly into the day. You take your first bite. Slow and deliberate. Bread, perhaps some vegetables, maybe a bit of cheese if fortune smiles. The candle flame wavers gently, reflecting off polished wood and simple bowls. You notice how the silence sharpens other senses. The scrape of spoon against bowl sounds louder than expected. The smell of food feels fuller. Time stretches, not because there's more of it, but because nothing is competing for it. One quirky tidbit you quietly absorb is that some monasteries used specially sized candles for meals. Shorter than prayer candles, to prevent lingering. The idea wasn't to rush monks through eating, but to maintain balance. Too long at table invited distraction. Too short invited resentment. The candle found the middle ground. Historians still argue whether these meal candles were standardized or improvised, but their presence is hard to ignore. As you eat, a reader's voice drifts through the hall. Calm and measured, the words flow steadily, unbroken by comment or reaction. You listen with half an ear, focusing more on rhythm than meaning. This is intentional. Meals nourish the body, readings nourish the mind, and candles quietly regulate both. When the flame reaches its final mark, the reading ends naturally, as if it, too, has been timed by wax. One light joke wanders through your thoughts. This is possibly the only dining experience where dessert is replaced by more silence. Surprisingly effective. Historians still argue whether silence at meals improved discipline or simply reduced conflict. Sitting here, you suspect both. Without conversation, there's nothing to rush for, nothing to argue over, nothing to distract from the slow awareness of eating. The candle enforces this calm without saying a word. It just keeps burning, unconcerned with personal preferences. You notice the way monks glance occasionally at the flame, not nervously, but respectfully. The end of the meal approaches, and no one seems disappointed. There's a quiet trust that food will return later, just as prayer will, just as sleep will. Time here is cyclical, not scarce. As the candle shortens, the pace of eating subtly slows. No one wants to be caught mid-bite when the signal comes. This unspoken coordination fascinates you. It's a social dance choreographed by fire. Everyone participates, even if no one discusses it. The candle finally reaches its end point, and the reader's voice trails off. Utensils are set down softly. There's no announcement, no dramatic finish. The meal ends the way it began, quietly. You stand with the others, feeling neither rushed nor overly full, just balanced. Historians still argue whether candle-timed meals influenced digestion or simply reinforced routine. Either way, the effect is undeniable. Eating becomes mindful by default. You can't hurry through it, and you can't linger endlessly. The flame holds you in the middle, where awareness lives. As you leave the refectory, the candle stub remains behind, cooling slowly, a small monument to nourishment completed. You carry that calm with you, realizing that even something as ordinary as eating becomes ritual when time is visible and shared. The candle has done its work again, and once more, you follow it onward. You begin to notice it most clearly when the seasons shift. The candle hasn't changed, but everything around it has. Winter presses in, tightening the air, making stone walls feel closer, heavier. Daylight becomes a brief visitor rather than a companion. And suddenly the relationship between flame and sun grows complicated. You stand near a narrow window, watching grey light struggle through clouds while a candle burns with stubborn consistency beside you. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval hours were seasonal. Daytime and nighttime hours expanded and contracted depending on the length of daylight. Especially in religious life. In summer, daylight hours stretched luxuriously. In winter, they shrank into something almost apologetic. Candles had to adapt to this shifting reality, even though they themselves burned at roughly the same speed year-round. You feel the tension immediately. In winter, candles suddenly seem too fast. Night prayers come quickly. Work hours feel compressed. The flame doesn't care that the sun barely showed up today. It keeps melting, insisting that time is passing whether light agrees or not. Historians still argue whether monasteries adjusted candle sizes seasonally to compensate or simply accepted the imbalance. Evidence suggests some did try to adapt, while others leaned into the discipline of darker days. One quirky tidbit tucked into monastic anecdotes suggests that winter candles were sometimes made thicker or paired together to extend certain offices. Imagine doubling up candles just to survive January. Medieval life hack, but make it devotional. You walk through the cloister as snow settles quietly outside. The sound muffled, the world hushed. Candlelight feels warmer now, more intimate. Shadows cling longer to corners. The flame becomes not just a timekeeper, but a companion against the dark. You realize how psychologically important this must have been. When the sun abandons you early, the candle takes on emotional weight. Summer tells a different story. You recall warmer days when sunlight flooded the corridors long before candles were needed. In those months, Candles felt almost redundant during daytime offices. They burned alongside the sun, not replacing it, but supporting it. Historians still argue whether monks relied more on natural light in summer and less on candles, or whether candles remained central regardless of season. From what you've seen, habit wins. Candles stay. The sun is a bonus. There's gentle frustration in this system. 2. You sense it in small gestures. A monk lingering a moment longer at prayer because the day feels too short, or moving more briskly in summer when time feels abundant. The candle doesn't adjust its personality. It asks you to adjust yours. This is part of the discipline, whether explicitly stated or not. One light joke drifts through your mind. Seasonal affective disorder. But medieval and candle-based. No lamps, just vibes. You begin to appreciate how seasonal confusion reinforces humility. No one here pretends to master time completely. The candle offers structure, but nature always has the final say. Clouds, cold, heat, all interfere. Historians still argue whether this variability strengthened monastic spirituality or simply made life more inconvenient. Standing in the cold glow of winter wax, you suspect it did both. As winter deepens, candles are guarded more carefully. Wax becomes precious. Flames are shielded from drafts more diligently. The act of lighting a candle feels heavier, more deliberate. Time itself feels heavier, too. Each inch of wax matters. Each prayer feels earned. In summer, by contrast, candles seem almost relaxed. They burn in brighter rooms, competing with daylight, their flames less dramatic. Time feels easier then, less demanding, but the structure remains unchanged. The same prayers, the same order. The candle teaches you that consistency doesn't depend on comfort. You move on, carrying this awareness with you. Time here is not a straight line. It expands, contracts, stumbles, and recovers, all while the candle keeps burning at its own pace. You realize that living this way requires patience not just with routine, but with the world itself. As you leave the window behind and return to the corridor, the candle's glow steadies once more. Season by season, flame by flame, the monastery continues, and you continue with it. Learning that confusion, too, can be part of the rhythm, especially when it's lit by something as quietly reliable as fire. You notice the visitors before you hear them. Their footsteps carry a different rhythm, less practiced, slightly hesitant, echoing just a fraction too loudly against the stone. Pilgrims, messengers, maybe a traveler seeking shelter for the night. They arrive carrying dust, questions, and their own ideas of time, and almost immediately, they begin to notice the candles. The mainstream historical fact is that monasteries across medieval Europe hosted a steady flow of outsiders, pilgrims on holy journeys, nobles seeking counsel, scholars passing through, and the occasional lost soul who simply needed a bed. These visitors often came from places with different routines, different expectations, and sometimes different methods of marking time. But once inside the monastery walls, candle time ruled everyone equally. You watch a traveler pause, brow furrowed, as a monk rises abruptly from a bench and gestures for others to follow. No bell has rung yet, no announcement made, just a candle, shortened to its quiet signal. The visitor looks around, confused but compliant, and joins the movement. There's no explanation offered. Time here doesn't explain itself. One quirky tidbit from travel accounts suggests that some visitors found monastic schedules deeply disorienting. Without clocks or clear verbal cues, they struggled to anticipate what came next. A few reportedly kept their own candles in guest quarters, trying to track the monastery's rhythm by imitation. Imagine syncing your schedule to a borrowed flame. It's charming and slightly desperate. Historians still argue whether monasteries adjusted their routines for guests or expected visitors to adapt fully. From what you see, the answer leans heavily toward adaptation by the outsider. The monastery doesn't bend its timekeeping system for convenience. The candle doesn't care who you are. It burns for everyone. You sit near a guest table as a monk quietly explains, without words, that it's time for rest. He gestures toward a candle stub, then toward the corridor. The message lands. Visitors learn quickly that asking, "How long?" isn't helpful here. The better question is, how much candle is left? There's a gentle humor in watching newcomers attempt to predict events. Someone glances at the flame, then at the window, then back at the flame, clearly trying to triangulate reality. Another whispers a question and immediately regrets it when silence answers back. Candle time humbles everyone eventually. Historians still argue whether candle timing was unique to monasteries or influenced secular households through contact with them. Some evidence suggests that candle clocks appeared in noble homes after prolonged monastic exposure. Standing here, you can see why. It's oddly compelling, chaotic, yes, but soothing in its own way. You notice that monks don't explain the system because they don't need to. The rhythm teaches itself. After a day or two, visitors stop asking questions. They begin to rise when others rise, sit when others sit, and watch candles without realizing they're doing it. Time, once strange, becomes familiar. One light joke flickers through your mind. Medieval jet lag. Cured by wax. As night settles, guest quarters glow softly with candlelight. Each flame a small island of borrowed routine. Visitors sleep differently here, earlier, deeper, perhaps confused but calmer. Without clocks, their bodies surrender to the environment. The candle becomes a surrogate guide, quietly resetting expectations. Historians still argue whether this immersion in monastic time left lasting impressions on travelers. Some accounts suggest it did, that people left monasteries changed. Slower, more attentive. Others returned eagerly to their noisy, bell-filled towns. Either way, candle time made an impression. It was impossible not to notice. You move past the guest area, returning to familiar corridors. The monastery breathes at its own pace, unaffected by outsiders. Candles burn, wax drips, shadows stretch, and anyone who steps inside, even briefly, must learn to move with the flame or feel perpetually out of step. As you walk on, you realize that candle time doesn't just structure life here, it quietly converts people, one visitor at a time, to a slower understanding of what a day can be. You start to notice the small adjustments only after you've lived inside the rhythm long enough. At first, everything felt fixed, almost ceremonial. Candle burns, prayer happens, work pauses. But now, with familiarity, you see the quiet flexibility hiding inside the rules. This is where human ingenuity slips in, soft-footed and discreet, making sure life doesn't snap under its own structure. The mainstream historical fact here is that monasteries, despite their reputation for rigidity, constantly adapted daily practices to real conditions. Rules were interpreted, not blindly enforced. Candle time was no exception. When wax ran low, when weather interfered, when illness spread through the cloister, monks adjusted, carefully, respectfully, and usually without admitting they were doing anything unusual at all. You watch a monk trim a wick just a bit shorter than usual. The flame responds by calming, slowing its burn. This isn't sabotage, it's stewardship. A longer-lasting candle means slightly longer intervals between prayers or work transitions. Not much, just enough to make the day humane. Historians still argue whether such adjustments were intentional or incidental. But standing here, it's hard not to see purpose in the movement. One quirky tidbit surfaces from scattered records. Some monasteries reused candle stubs by binding them together, creating uneven but functional, patchwork candles. These burned unpredictably. But in lean times, unpredictability was better than darkness. Time stitched together from leftovers, imperfect, but serviceable. You notice how senior monks seem to know when to intervene. A candle burning too fast is quietly relocated. A drafty window is blocked with cloth. A second candle is added nearby, not to replace the first, but to reassure it, as if flames keep each other honest. No announcements, no acknowledgements, just subtle course correction. Historians still argue whether monks considered these practices bending the rules or simply applying wisdom. The rule of Benedict emphasizes discretion, judgment applied with care. Candle time, for all its authority, is not immune to compassion. If a community is exhausted, the candle's meaning shifts slightly, not abandoned, just interpreted. You sense this during a long afternoon when work drags and focus thins. The candle reaches its mark, but no one moves immediately. A breath passes, another, then prayer begins, unhurried. That pause isn't rebellion, it's recognition. Timekeeping here isn't mechanical obedience, it's collective agreement. One light joke drifts in. Even medieval monks knew when the vibes were off. You also notice small, almost playful habits. A monk shielding a flame with his hand while passing by. Not strictly necessary but oddly affectionate. Another straightening a candle that leans too much, as if encouraging it to stand tall. These gestures aren't written anywhere. They're learned through observation, absorbed like accent or posture. Historians still argue whether candle timing ever caused disputes serious enough to be recorded. A few hints suggest mild disagreements, never dramatic. Always internal. The system works because everyone agreed to prioritize harmony over correctness. If time was a little wrong, unity mattered more. As evening approaches, you realize that these adjustments are what keep the system alive. Without them, candle time would be brittle, prone to failure. With them, it breathes, it flexes, it survives centuries of change. You move on through the corridor, candlelight stretching ahead of you, softened by human hands and judgment. Time here isn't cheated, it's cared for. And that care, quiet and constant, is what makes the rhythm sustainable. You sense the change before you fully understand it. The candles are still here, still burning, still quietly ruling the day, but now, something else hums beneath the surface. It's subtle at first, like a distant vibration you can't quite place. Somewhere beyond these walls, gears are turning, not metaphorically, literally. The mainstream historical fact is that by the late medieval period, mechanical clocks began appearing in European monasteries, often among the first institutions to adopt them. These early clocks were large, loud, and anything but precise by modern standards. But they promised something radical, time that didn't melt, drip, or care about drafts. You don't see one yet, but you feel its influence creeping in, like a rumor that refuses to stay quiet. You walk past a familiar candle stand and notice something odd. The candle is still lit, but it's no longer alone. Nearby, mounted high on a wall, is a bulky wooden structure with metal teeth and hanging weights. It doesn't tick, it clanks, groans, and occasionally sounds like it's clearing its throat. This is time trying to reinvent itself. Historians still argue whether monasteries adopted mechanical clocks for convenience, prestige, or discipline. Some suggest clocks were installed primarily to regulate prayer more precisely. Others believe they were status symbols, proof that a monastery was wealthy, educated, and connected. Standing here, you suspect it was all of the above, plus curiosity. Monks were, after all, deeply interested in order. One quirky tidbit from early clock history is that many of these devices didn't have faces. No hands, no numbers. They existed solely to ring bells at set intervals. Time, once again, announced itself through sound rather than sight. The candle watched. The clock shouted. You can already guess which one the monks trusted more. You watch how the community responds. No one rushes to abandon the candle. In fact, it continues to burn as faithfully as ever. The clock doesn't replace it, it supplements it. The bell rings. Yes, but someone still glances at the flame. Just to be sure. Mechanical time is impressive, but candle time has earned its place. There's tension here, though it's polite and unspoken. The clock insists on regularity, equal hours, consistency across seasons. The candle resists, quietly reminding everyone that winter nights are longer and summer days more generous. Historians still argue which system monks trusted more during this transition period. But evidence suggests candles remained deeply embedded long after clocks arrived. One light joke flickers through your mind. The first monk to hear a clock probably thought it was possessed. Fair reaction. You notice that some tasks begin to align more tightly with bell signals, while others remain candle-bound. Prayer hours might now be announced by machinery, but reading, meals, and rest still lean heavily on flame. The candle hasn't been fired. It's been demoted, maybe, but gently. You stand in the chapel during evening prayer as the bell rings. Echoing through stone, the sound is commanding, undeniable, and yet, when prayer ends, a monk steps forward and snuffs a candle with deliberate care. The gesture feels symbolic. Time may now be measured in iron and weight, but meaning is still handled by hand. Historians still argue whether this shift marked a spiritual loss or simply a technological upgrade. Some claim mechanical clocks pulled time away from nature and into abstraction. Others argue they freed monks from uncertainty. Watching this coexistence, you sense that nothing is truly lost yet. The candle still burns. The clock just adds noise. As night settles in, the clock falls quiet, waiting for its next cue. The candle, meanwhile, continues its slow work, unchanged. You feel a strange loyalty toward it. Melted wax feels more honest than clanking gears. You move on, aware that you're standing in the overlap between eras. Candle time isn't gone, it's sharing space, and for now, at least, the flame still has a voice. You feel the ending before you see it. Not an abrupt stop, Not a dramatic announcement, just a gradual thinning. Like the last warmth from a candle long after the flame has gone. Candle time is no longer the unquestioned ruler it once was. But it hasn't vanished either. It lingers, especially at night, especially in places where habit outweighs novelty. The mainstream historical fact is that even after mechanical clocks spread widely through Europe, candles remained part of monastic timekeeping for centuries. Clocks broke, weights slipped, gears froze. Candles, humble and familiar, were still trusted as backups, companions, and quiet confirmations. You watch a monk light one for Compline, the final prayer of the day. Even though the bell rang moments earlier, old habits don't disappear just because something louder arrives. You walk through the cloister as dusk deepens. The clock has finished its duty for now, silent and still, while candles take over once more. Night belongs to flame, always has. Historians still argue whether monasteries emotionally preferred candle time to mechanical time. And while you can't read their thoughts, you can feel the atmosphere shift. The absence of clanking feels like relief. One quirky tidbit tucked into late medieval records mentions monks complaining that clocks made time feel harsh. Not inaccurate, just sharp. Candles, by contrast, softened edges. They faded gradually. They allowed preparation. Imagine preferring your deadlines to melt instead of ring. Honestly, relatable. You notice how candles are now treated with something like nostalgia. They're handled carefully, lit deliberately, as if acknowledging their long service. A flame catches, steadies, and casts shadows that feel older than the walls themselves. This isn't resistance to progress. It's respect for continuity. Historians still argue whether candle time influenced how monks experienced aging and memory. Did life feel slower when time was visible? Did days blur more gently? Standing here, watching wax soften and fall, you sense how memory might cling to moments shaped by light rather than numbers. You remember flames. You don't remember ticks. You sit briefly, letting the candle burn beside you. There's no pressure now. The system is no longer solely dependent on wax. So the flame feels freer, almost ceremonial. It marks presence more than schedule. The monks chant softly, voices low, and the candle listens, unhurried. One light joke drifts in. Candles retiring with dignity while clocks do all the shouting. Career goals. As Compline ends, the candle is snuffed, not because time demands it, but because night does. Darkness returns gently, without drama. You realize that this is the true legacy of candle time, not accuracy. Not control, but grace in endings. You rise and move toward rest, knowing this chapter is closing. Candle time no longer governs everything, but it still governs how endings feel. Slow, intentional, kind. You move more slowly now, not because you're tired, but because the space invites it. The monastery at night has a different gravity. Softer, less concerned with structure and more focused on settling. Candles are fewer here, placed deliberately, like punctuation marks at the ends of sentences rather than rulers of paragraphs. You feel the last echoes of candle time doing what it has always done best, guiding things gently toward rest. The mainstream historical fact rests quietly in the background, even as formal candle time faded. The habits it created remained deeply embedded in monastic life. The sense of pacing, of letting activities conclude naturally, of respecting transitions rather than snapping between them, these survived long after wax stopped defining the hours. You see it in the way monks move, how they pause before doors, how they breathe before sitting. You pass a small alcove where a single candle burns low, unattended, no marks, no schedule, just light. This flame isn't measuring anything. It's accompanying. Historians still argue whether candles eventually became more symbolic than practical in monasteries. But here the distinction feels unnecessary. Symbols can still shape behavior. The candle reminds you to slow down simply by existing. One quirky tidbit whispered through later monastic writings suggests that some monks continued privately estimating time by candle burn long after clocks dominated communal life. Old habits die quietly. You imagine someone watching wax drip late at night, not because they have to, but because it feels right. Time, once learned this way, leaves an imprint. You sit for a moment, feeling how different this calm is from the structured calm of earlier hours. There's no next signal to wait for, no flame reaching a mark, just the gentle certainty that the day has been fully used. One light joke crosses your mind, even time needs a bedtime routine. Historians still argue whether candle-based living influenced long-term mental well-being. Did it reduce anxiety? Did it foster patience? There are no surveys, no data points, just clues in the language monks used, words like peace, steadiness, balance. Sitting here, you feel how plausible that is. When time moves visibly and slowly, it's harder to feel chased by it. You lie back, metaphorically if not literally, and let the final images settle. Stone walls cooling, wax hardened into quiet shapes. A flame remembered more than seen. Candle time doesn't end with extinction. It ends with absorption, into habit, into memory, into a way of being that doesn't need measuring anymore. Your thoughts begin to soften now, stretching out the way shadows do when a flame grows small. There's nothing left to watch, nothing left to wait for. The candle has already done its work, and you don't need to follow it anymore. Time, for once, isn't asking anything of you. You imagine the monastery settling fully into night. No bells, no voices, just the quiet understanding that tomorrow will come when it's ready. Not because someone demands it. The air feels cooler, cleaner, breaths deepen on their own, shoulders lower. Even the idea of schedules fades into something gentle and distant. If your mind drifts back to the flame, it does so without urgency. You don't count how long it burns. You don't check where it stands. You simply remember how it looked, steady, patient, unconcerned with speed. That memory is enough. Let the images blur now. Stone becomes warmth. Wax becomes light. Light becomes rest. There's nowhere else to go tonight. Nothing else to understand. You've followed time all the way to the point where it releases you. And as your thoughts slow, you don't need to hold on to them. Let them melt away quietly. The same way wax always did, without effort, without resistance, without sound.